Samantha Whitman's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she strode into the Manhattan office building. Heads turned as she passed, not out of admiration but because of the sheer force of her presence. Samantha was the kind of person who demanded attention without saying a word, a woman of sharp suits, sharper words, and an unshakable belief in her superiority. At just 29, Samantha had carved out a name for herself in the corporate world, rising to the role of director of marketing at one of the most prestigious firms in New York City. To her, success wasn't just about working hard, it was about winning, about proving she was better than everyone else. Her upbringing in an affluent Connecticut family had shaped her into someone who believed the world was hers to conquer. Her mornings began the same way every day: a triple-shot espresso from the boutique cafe downstairs, a dismissive glance at the janitor cleaning the lobby, and a sharp critique for anyone who dared step in her way. To Samantha, people like Daniel Carter, the janitor who seemed to always be scrubbing the same spot on the floor, were invisible, part of the background noise of her perfectly curated life. But Daniel Carter was far from invisible. To those who knew him, Daniel was a quiet force of wisdom and perseverance. At 47, he carried the weight of a life that had once been full of promise but had been derailed by circumstances beyond his control. Years ago, Daniel had owned a thriving construction business in Chicago. His company wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline for people who needed second chances: ex-convicts, single parents, and young people trying to escape cycles of poverty. Daniel had been a pillar of his community, a man others looked up to. But then came the recession. Contracts dried up, bills piled up, and Daniel's world came crashing down. He lost his business, his home, and eventually his marriage. With no other options, he moved to New York City to start over, taking a job as a janitor to support his teenage daughter, who was studying to become a nurse back in Chicago. Despite everything, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity, believing that no job was beneath him if it allowed him to provide for his family. Samantha's first real interaction with Daniel came on a rainy Monday morning. She was late for a meeting, her mood soured by the downpour outside. As she hurried into the lobby, she nearly slipped on the freshly mopped floor where Daniel was working. "Are you kidding me?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the lobby. "Do you realize people like me have actual jobs to get to? This is ridiculous." Daniel straightened, his calm brown eyes meeting hers. "Morning, ma'am," he said politely. "I'll be out of your way in just a moment." "Just a moment isn't good enough," Samantha hissed, stepping around him with exaggerated annoyance. "Maybe if people like you worked harder, you wouldn't be stuck cleaning floors." Several employees in the lobby paused to watch the exchange, their faces a mix of discomfort and disbelief. Daniel, however, remained unfazed. He simply nodded and resumed his work, letting Samantha's words roll off his back. He had faced far worse in his life. Over the next few weeks, Samantha made Daniel a target of her frustrations. She saw his calm demeanor as defiance and his resilience as an affront to her authority. Each time she passed him in the office, she found new ways to belittle him. One morning, Samantha walked into her corner office and deliberately knocked her coffee cup onto the floor. As the brown liquid pooled near her desk, she pressed the intercom button for facilities. A few moments later, Daniel arrived with his mop and bucket. She didn't even look up from her computer. "Next time, try to clean these offices before people like me show up," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, his voice steady as always. He crouched down to clean the spill while Samantha continued to type, deliberately ignoring him. Another time, she left a stack of papers on the breakroom table with a sticky note that read, "Trash this mess." She knew Daniel would see it and take care of it. When her coworkers commented on her behavior, she brushed it off with a laugh. "Please, he's here to clean. I'm just making sure he has something to do," she said, smiling as if it were a harmless joke. But her actions didn't go unnoticed. Quiet murmurs of discontent spread through the office. Some employees began to distance themselves from Samantha, uncomfortable with how she treated Daniel. Others, including her rival Margaret Ellis, grew increasingly vocal in their disapproval. The breaking point came during a high-profile meeting with a major client, Anderson and Miller, a firm that was considering a multi-million-dollar partnership with Samantha's company. The stakes were high. And Samantha was determined to use the meeting to outshine Margaret and secure the promotion she desperately wanted. As the clients entered the conference room, Samantha noticed a small spill near the entrance. Smirking, she pressed the intercom for facilities, knowing Daniel would respond. When Daniel arrived with his mop and bucket, Samantha seized the moment. As he cleaned the spill, she turned to the clients with a laugh. "Imagine this," she said, her voice loud and theatrical. "You're here to discuss multi-million-dollar campaigns. And this is the view you get, a janitor cleaning up a mess." The room fell silent. The clients exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with her tone. Margaret, who was seated across the table, spoke up immediately. "Samantha, that's uncalled for," she said, her voice firm. "Daniel is doing his job, just like all of us." Samantha rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Margaret, I'm just being honest." At that moment, Daniel straightened and looked directly at Samantha. His calm eyes betrayed none of the hurt he felt. "Ma'am," he said quietly but firmly, "I'm just doing what's asked of me. I hope you can say the same." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, Samantha faltered. She noticed the disapproval on the clients' faces and the way her colleagues avoided meeting her eyes. Unbeknownst to Samantha, one of the junior employees had recorded the exchange on their phone. By the end of the day, the video was circulating through the office, and the backlash was swift. HR summoned Samantha for a formal reprimand, and her reputation took a significant hit. The video spread beyond the office, making its way onto social media. Former colleagues and industry professionals commented on the post, condemning Samantha's behavior. Her name became associated with arrogance and entitlement, and she quickly found herself ostracized. At the same time, Margaret's reputation soared. Her defense of Daniel earned her the respect of both clients and coworkers. And it wasn't long before the CEO, Jonathan Steele, called a company-wide meeting to announce the promotion. Samantha walked into the conference room with her head held high, certain the position was hers. But when Jonathan announced Margaret Ellis as the new vice president of marketing, the room erupted in applause. Samantha sat frozen, her face pale with shock. After the meeting, she stormed into Jonathan's office. Furious, "I deserved that promotion," she shouted. "You're letting a janitor ruin my career." Jonathan's response was cold and cutting. "No, Samantha, you ruined your career. Daniel Carter has shown more professionalism and integrity than you ever have. If you can't treat people with respect, you don't belong here." Within days, Samantha's behavior toward Daniel and Margaret became the talk of the office. Clients began requesting to work exclusively with Margaret, and Samantha found herself isolated. Her once promising career was unraveling, and for the first time, she began to understand the consequences of her actions. A month later, Samantha was fired after another incident with a coworker. She was unceremoniously escorted out of the building, her belongings packed into a cardboard box. The shame was unbearable. For weeks, she tried to find another job, but her reputation had followed her. No one wanted to hire her, and the rejection emails piled up. Her savings dwindled, and she was forced to move out of her upscale apartment in Manhattan and into a tiny studio in Queens. The designer clothes and expensive dinners were gone, replaced by thrift store finds and canned soup. Samantha, who had once believed she was invincible, was now grappling with the harsh realities of life. One chilly evening, Samantha wandered into a community center, drawn by the smell of food and the sound of laughter. Inside, she saw a group of teenagers gathered around a table, listening intently to a man at the front of the room. To her astonishment, it was Daniel Carter. He was leading a workshop on job skills, teaching the teens how to write resumes and prepare for interviews. His calm, confident demeanor was a stark contrast to the man she had belittled. For the first time, Samantha saw him not as a janitor, but as a mentor and a leader. She hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly. Daniel looked up, surprised to see her. His expression softened. "Miss Whitman," he said, "what brings you here?" I was hoping to volunteer," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to help." Daniel studied her for a long moment before nodding. "There's always room for another pair of hands," he said. Samantha's first days volunteering at the community center were humbling, to say the least. Daniel assigned her small tasks, distributing supplies, organizing resumes, and assisting the teens with basic job application forms. It was menial work, far removed from the corner office and high-stakes meetings she used to preside over. At first, Samantha struggled. Her old arrogance whispered that she was better than this, that she belonged in a boardroom, not a community center. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. She started to see the resilience in the teens she worked with, their hunger for a chance, their willingness to learn, and their gratitude for even the smallest acts of kindness. One evening, Samantha stayed late to help a young woman named Lila prepare for a job interview. Lila, just 17, had grown up in foster care and was desperate for a job to support her younger siblings. Samantha coached her on interview questions, helped her pick out an outfit from the center's donated clothes, and even gave her a pep talk. "You're going to do great," Samantha said, handing Lila a neatly folded blazer. "Just be confident and show them who you are." When Lila landed the job a week later, she came rushing into the center to share the news. She hugged Samantha tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, Samantha felt something she hadn't in a long time, pride not in herself, but in someone else. One evening, after the teens had gone home, Samantha and Daniel found themselves alone in the center. Samantha hesitated before speaking. "Daniel," she began, her voice quiet, "I owe you an apology for everything. The way I treated you was horrible. I don't know why I acted that way, but it wasn't right." Daniel looked at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "Miss Whitman," he said, "life has a way of humbling all of us. I've been there too, thinking I was better than others, only to have life teach me otherwise. What matters is what you do next." Samantha nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want to do better. I want to make up for the harm I caused." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then start by being kind, to others and to yourself. It's a long road, but you've already taken the first step." Their conversation marked a turning point for Samantha. She began to open up about her past, not just to Daniel but to herself. She acknowledged the flaws in her upbringing and the entitlement that had been instilled in her. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her mistakes, and to take responsibility for them. Over time, Samantha became an integral part of the community center. She started a program to teach basic office skills, using her background in marketing and business to help others. She reached out to her former colleagues, asking for donations of computers, supplies, and even their time as mentors. To her surprise, many of them responded positively, impressed by the changes they saw in her. Margaret Ellis, now the vice president of marketing, even attended one of the center's events. Samantha approached her hesitantly, unsure of how she would react. "Margaret," Samantha said, "I just wanted to thank you for standing up to me, for calling out my behavior. I didn't see it then, but you were right." Margaret smiled. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong. Samantha, I'm glad to see you've turned things around." The two women shared a brief but genuine moment of understanding. It was a small step toward healing the wounds Samantha had caused, but it meant the world to her. As the community center grew, Daniel and Samantha began planning a large fundraiser to support their programs. Samantha used her marketing skills to design a campaign that highlighted the center's success stories, including Lila's journey from foster care to employment. The night of the fundraiser, the community center was transformed. String lights hung from the ceiling. Tables were adorned with simple but elegant decorations, and the room buzzed with energy. Former participants, local business owners, and even some of Samantha's old colleagues attended. Daniel gave the keynote speech, sharing his story of resilience and the importance of second chances. His words brought the room to its feet, and Samantha couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not in herself, but in the man who had taught her so much. When it was her turn to speak, Samantha stepped up to the podium, her hands trembling slightly. "I used to think success was about power and status," she began. "I thought I was better than others because of where I came from and what I had achieved. But I was wrong. True success isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. It's about lifting others up and creating opportunities for those who need them. And I learned that from the people in this room, especially Daniel Carter." Her words were met with applause. And for the first time, Samantha felt at peace with herself. Months after the fundraiser, Samantha officially joined the community center as a full-time staff member. She continued to expand the center's programs, focusing on helping people rebuild their lives after setbacks. She also began mentoring young professionals, using her own experiences as a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. Daniel, now a respected leader in the community, remained her guide and friend. Together, they worked to create a space where everyone, regardless of their past, could find hope and opportunity. Years later, Samantha sat in her modest office at the center, looking at a photo on her desk. It was from the fundraiser, a picture of her and Daniel standing side by side, surrounded by the people they had helped. She thought about how far she had come, from the entitled executive who had humiliated a janitor to a woman who had found purpose in lifting others up. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As she prepared for a meeting with a new group of volunteers, Samantha smiled. She knew her story wasn't just about redemption, it was about the power of kindness, resilience, and the belief that anyone can change if they're willing to do the work. And with that, she stepped out of her office, ready to make a difference. Daniel Carter's daughter, Rachel, had always been the light of his life. Now a 23-year-old nursing student in Chicago, she was weeks away from graduation. Despite the distance, Daniel stayed in touch as best he could, sending her small gifts, frequent calls, and occasional visits when his work schedule allowed. He had sacrificed much to ensure she had the opportunities he once dreamed of for himself. One quiet evening, as Daniel prepared to lock up the community center, his phone buzzed. It was a video call from Rachel. He answered, and her familiar, smiling face appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad," she said brightly. "Guess what? You finally figured out how to make fried chicken like I do?" Daniel teased, leaning against the desk. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Very funny. No, I have news. You're looking at the new pediatric oncology nurse at Chicago Memorial." Daniel's face lit up with pride. "Rachel, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." As they chatted about her plans and upcoming move to the hospital campus, Rachel's tone shifted slightly. "By the way, I saw something interesting on social media the other day. Are you mentoring Samantha Whitman?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You know about her?" Rachel nodded. "She's been posting a lot about the community center. Her captions are all about learning from you and how much you've helped her. I looked her up. She's that executive you told me about a while back. Isn't she? The one who used to give you a hard time." Daniel sighed, running a hand over his head. "She's come a long way, Rachel. She's not the same person she used to be." Rachel paused, her face thoughtful. "That's amazing, Dad, but I have to ask, why? Why did you forgive her after everything she did?" Daniel's smile softened. "Because I've been where she is. Life has a way of humbling us. And when it does, we have two choices: to let it break us or to learn and grow. I saw that she wanted to change, and I knew I couldn't hold her past against her forever." Rachel looked at him with admiration. "You've always been the strongest person I know, Dad. I'm so lucky to have you." Daniel's heart swelled. "No, Rachel, I'm the lucky one." After ending the call, Daniel sat in the quiet of the center, memories flooding his mind. He thought about the life he had once built in Chicago, a successful construction business, a tight-knit community, and a beautiful home where Rachel had grown up. He also thought about how quickly it had all disappeared. When the recession hit, the contracts stopped coming. He had to let his employees go, one by one, until it was just him, holding on to the hope that things would turn around. They didn't. The bank foreclosed on his house, and he moved into a cramped apartment with Rachel, trying to shield her from the worst of their struggles. When his wife left, unable to cope with the pressure, Daniel had promised Rachel that he would never give up. In the years since, he had carried that promise like a badge of honor. Even as a janitor in New York, he found ways to provide for her, sending what little he could to support her dreams. Now, seeing her on the brink of success, he felt the weight of those sacrifices lift. But the memories of his failures still lingered, a quiet shadow that he carried with him. 2 weeks later, Rachel surprised Daniel by showing up at the community center unannounced. She had a few days off before starting her new job and wanted to spend them with her dad. When Rachel arrived, the center was bustling. Teens were working on resumes in one corner, while Samantha led a group discussion on interview skills. Rachel observed the scene with wide eyes. "This place is amazing," she said, hugging Daniel tightly. "I can see why you love it here." Daniel chuckled. "It's a lot of work, but it's worth it." As he introduced Rachel to Samantha, Rachel extended her hand warmly. "It's nice to meet you. My dad speaks highly of you." Samantha blushed slightly. "That's kind of him, but really, I wouldn't be here without his guidance." Rachel spent the next few days volunteering at the center, getting to know the teens and witnessing firsthand the impact of her father's work. She also spent time talking with Samantha, curious about her transformation. "I used to think I had all the answers," Samantha admitted during one of their conversations. "But your dad showed me what true strength and humility look like. He's the reason I'm trying to be better." Rachel smiled. "He's always been like that. Even when we lost everything, he never let it break him. He just kept going." On Rachel's last night in New York, Daniel, Samantha, and Rachel sat in the center's small office, sharing stories over takeout. As they laughed and talked, Rachel grew reflective. "You know, Dad," she said, "you've spent so much time helping others. But I don't think you realize how much of an inspiration you are. To me, to Samantha, to everyone here. You turned everything around, not just for yourself, but for so many people." Daniel looked down at his hands, his voice quiet. "I just did what needed to be done. Life doesn't give you a choice sometimes." Rachel shook her head. "No, you chose. You chose to rise above it, to stay kind, and to give back. That's not something everyone does." Samantha nodded in agreement. "She's right. Daniel, you've built something incredible here, something that's changing lives. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough for what you've done for me." Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I'm proud of you both, Rachel for becoming the amazing nurse you've always wanted to be, and Samantha for proving that people can change. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." Rachel returned to Chicago with a renewed sense of pride in her father, carrying his lessons of resilience and compassion into her own life. Samantha continued to grow in her role at the center, inspired by the example Daniel set every day. For Daniel, life felt fuller than it had in years. He saw his past not as a series of failures but as the foundation for the life he now led, a life dedicated to giving others the second chances he had once needed himself. On a quiet evening, as he locked up the community center, Daniel looked up at the stars and smiled. His journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought him to a place of peace, surrounded by people who reminded him every day that the greatest strength lies in lifting others up. As the community center thrived, it began attracting attention beyond the local neighborhood. Media outlets picked up on the work being done there, particularly the mentorship programs spearheaded by Daniel and Samantha. Donations increased, and the center began to expand its reach. But success brought new challenges. A large development company, Crestwood Enterprises, announced plans to buy up several properties in the neighborhood, including the building where the community center was housed. Crestwood wanted to tear it down to make way for luxury apartments. When Daniel received the eviction notice, it hit him like a punch to the gut. The center had become a lifeline for so many, and losing it would devastate the community. Samantha, ever resourceful, sprang into action. "We're not letting this happen," she said with determination. "We'll fight this." Daniel nodded, but his expression was heavy. "It's not going to be easy. They've got money and lawyers. Then we'll rally the community." Samantha replied, "This place means too much to let it go without a fight." Samantha and Daniel organized a town hall meeting, inviting residents, local businesses, and anyone who had been touched by the center's work. Rachel flew in from Chicago to support her father, taking the stage to share her story. "My dad taught me that no matter how hard life gets, you don't give up," Rachel said, her voice steady but emotional. "This center isn't just a building. It's hope. It's a second chance for people who need it. We can't let it be taken away." The room erupted in applause. And by the end of the night, dozens of volunteers had signed up to help. Social media campaigns were launched, petitions were circulated, and local news stations covered the story. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. But Crestwood Enterprises didn't back down. They countered with legal threats and dismissive statements, insisting their project was for the betterment of the neighborhood. The battle became a David and Goliath struggle, with Daniel and Samantha leading the charge. As the fight dragged on, Daniel felt the weight of the conflict pressing down on him. There were moments when he doubted whether they could win, moments when he questioned if it was worth the toll it was taking on everyone involved. One night, as he sat alone in the center, Samantha found him staring at the walls. She sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," she said softly, "we're going to get through this." He sighed. "I've lost so much before. I'm scared of losing this too." Samantha looked at him, her eyes filled with conviction. "This isn't like before. You're not alone this time. We're all in this together." Her words rekindled something in Daniel. He realized that the center wasn't just his burden to carry, it belonged to the entire community. And together, they were stronger than anything Crestwood could throw at them. Months later, the fight came to a head. After weeks of negotiations, public protests, and media coverage, Crestwood Enterprises finally backed down. The community center would remain, and the surrounding properties would be protected from redevelopment. The victory was celebrated with a block party, where neighbors, volunteers, and supporters came together to rejoice. Daniel and Samantha stood at the heart of it all, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding them. During the celebration, Rachel raised a toast, "To my dad and Samantha, who remind us every day that kindness and perseverance can change the world." The crowd cheered, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt truly at peace. He looked around at the faces of the people he had helped and thought of how far he had come. The community center wasn't just a building, it was a testament to resilience, to hope, and to the power of second chances. Years later, the community center had grown into a thriving hub, offering workshops, counseling, job training, and after-school programs. Daniel, now in his 60s, continued to mentor young people, his wisdom and kindness shaping the lives of countless individuals. Samantha had become the director of the center, dedicating her life to its mission. Her journey from entitlement to empathy inspired everyone she met. She often spoke at events, sharing her story and the lessons Daniel had taught her. Rachel, now a successful nurse, frequently visited the center, volunteering her time and expertise. She had taken her father's lessons to heart, building a life rooted in compassion and service. One evening, Daniel sat on a bench outside the center, watching the sunset. Samantha joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Another busy day," she said with a smile. Daniel chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Samantha spoke again. "You know, none of this would have happened without you." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't just me, it was you, Rachel, the community, everyone who believed this place was worth fighting for." Samantha smiled, her heart full. "Still, you showed me what it means to lead with kindness. I'll never forget that." Daniel looked at her, his expression warm. "Samantha, the best leaders aren't the ones who demand respect. They're the ones who earn it by lifting others up. You've become one of those leaders." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His life hadn't followed the path he once envisioned, but it had led him to something greater, a legacy built on hope, resilience, and the belief that anyone, no matter their past, could find redemption